Imagine this. You're living in one of the most difficult periods of your life. You just lost your wife, your closest companion for 25 years. Then you lost your uncle, the one man who protected you from your enemies. You've been mocked, humiliated, and literally pelted with rocks in the street when you tried to preach in a nearby city. Your community is fractured. Your followers are few. And by all outward appearances, things are falling apart. And then, one night, one single night, everything changes. Not slowly, not gradually, all at once. You are taken from Mecca to Jerusalem in the blink of an eye. You are then carried up, through the sky, past cloud and star, and whatever else exists beyond, through 7 distinct layers of heaven, until you stand, by some accounts, closer to God than any human being has ever stood before. And then, before the sun rises, you're back home. This is the story of Isra and Miraj, the night journey and ascension of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It is one of the most celebrated events in Islamic history. It is also one of the most debated, because while nearly every Muslim accepts that this event happened, scholars have been arguing for over 1,000 years about the exact nature of what happened. Was it physical? Was it spiritual? Was it a dream? Or something else entirely? Today, we're going to dig into all of it. The story, the context, the controversy, and why this one night still echoes through the lives of more than 1 billion people every single day. Let's get into it. Before we get to the miracle, you have to understand what was going on in Muhammad's life at the time, because the timing of this event is not incidental. It matters. Islamic scholars and historians place Isra Mi'raj in approximately the 10th or 11th year of Muhammad's prophethood, so roughly around 620 to 621 CE. And this period is known in Islamic tradition as al-Huzn, the year of grief. Why grief? Because in close succession, Muhammad lost the 2 people who meant the most to him. First, his wife Khadija. She was the first person to believe in him. When he came running down from the cave of Hira, terrified, she was the one who calmed him down and said, "God would never disgrace you." She stood by him for 25 years through some of the most intense opposition you can imagine. And she was gone. Then, just months later, his uncle Abu Talib died. Now Abu Talib wasn't Muslim. Historians actually debate whether he ever converted, but he was Muhammad's protector. In the tribal structure of 7th century Arabia, having a powerful clan leader backing you was basically your security guarantee. Without Abu Talib, Muhammad was politically exposed in a way he hadn't been before. According to Ibn Hisham's Sirah, one of the earliest and most detailed biographies of the Prophet, the Quraysh tribe of Mecca began openly harassing and insulting Muhammad in ways they had previously held back out of respect for Abu Talib. And if that wasn't enough, Muhammad then traveled to the city of Taif, about 60 miles from Mecca, hoping to find a new base of support and a new audience for his message. Instead, he was rejected, humiliated, and chased out by a mob who threw stones at him until his feet bled. So picture him at this moment, grieving, isolated, rejected from one city, endangered in his own. And yet, he doesn't quit. He keeps going. According to Islamic scholar Martin Lings, in his widely respected biography Muhammad's Life, based on the earliest sources, this period represents one of the most humanly difficult phases of the Prophet's mission. And it is precisely in the middle of this suffering that Isra Mi'raj occurs. That timing, many scholars argue, is itself deeply meaningful. The darkest moment, followed by the most transcendent experience. Okay, so now you've got the context. Let's get into the actual event. The word Isra comes from the Arabic root meaning to travel by night. And that is exactly what the first part of this event is. A nocturnal journey from Mecca to Jerusalem. The account appears directly in the Quran. In Surah Al-Isra, the 17th chapter, the very first verse says, and I'm paraphrasing here to keep it natural, "Glory be to the one who took his servant on a journey by night from the sacred mosque to the farthest mosque, whose surroundings we have blessed, to show him of our signs." That's it. That's the Quranic reference to the Isra. It's brief. One verse. The Quran doesn't elaborate on the details the way you might expect. That additional detail comes from the Hadith literature, the recorded sayings and experiences of the Prophet, particularly those collected in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. considered by Sunni Muslims to be the most reliable collections. So what do the Hadiths say happened? According to the account narrated by Anas ibn Malik in Sahih al-Bukhari, while the Prophet was resting near the Kaaba, some narrations say he was sleeping, others say he was in a state between sleep and waking. The angel Jibreel or Gabriel appeared to him. Jibreel opened the Prophet's chest, removed his heart, washed it with water from the Zamzam well, filled it with wisdom and faith, and then placed it back. This washing or purification of the heart, known as Shar al-Sadr, appears in multiple narrations and is seen as preparation for what was about to come. Then Jibreel brought the al-Buraq. Now the al-Buraq is described in the Hadith as a white animal, smaller than a mule, larger than a donkey, with wings. Its stride, according to Sahih Muslim, would reach the farthest point visible to the eye in a single step. In other words, impossibly fast, supernaturally fast. The Prophet mounted the al-Buraq, and together they traveled, in what accounts suggest was an almost instantaneous journey, from the sacred mosque in Mecca to the Masjid al-Aqsa, the farthest mosque in Jerusalem. Now here's an interesting historical note. According to scholars of Islamic history, including those writing in the Encyclopedia of the Quran published by Brill Academic, the reference to the farthest mosque has been connected to Jerusalem and the Temple Mount since the earliest period of Islamic scholarship. This is why Al-Aqsa Mosque, literally meaning the farthest mosque, carries such immense significance in Islam. Its importance is rooted directly in this event. When the Prophet arrived in Jerusalem, the Hadith narrations say he tied the al-Buraq at a ring near the entrance and went inside. And there he found a gathering unlike any other in history, the assembled prophets of God: Adam, Ibrahim or Abraham, Musa or Moses, Isa or Jesus, and others. Muhammad was asked to lead them all in prayer. Think about what that's saying symbolically. The man who was just chased out of Taif with bleeding feet, who just lost his wife and his protector, is now standing at the head of every major prophet in the Abrahamic tradition, leading them in worship. According to Fazlur Rahman in his academic work Prophecy in Islam, this moment is deeply significant in Islamic theology. It establishes Muhammad not as a new religious figure breaking from the past, but as the final link in a long, continuous chain of prophets. A seal, not a rupture, but a completion. After the prayer in Jerusalem, the next phase begins: the Miraj. The word Miraj means ladder or stairs or to ascend. And this is the part of the story that people find either the most awe-inspiring or the most difficult to process, depending on where you're coming from. From Jerusalem, according to the Hadith narrations, particularly the long account in Sahih Muslim narrated by Anas ibn Malik, the Prophet was taken upward, through the heavens, layer by layer. Now before we go through each layer, let me acknowledge something. The different Hadith narrations don't all perfectly match each other on every detail. Which prophets were on which level, the exact order of some events. There are variations. Classical scholars like Ibn Kathir addressed these variations extensively in his work Al-Bidaya wal-Nihaya, or The Beginning and the End, and generally reconciled them as differences in narration style rather than contradictions. But we'll come back to that. The first heaven. Inside the first heaven, Muhammad meets Adam, the first human being. Adam greets him warmly and acknowledges him as a righteous son and a noble prophet. To his right, the prophet sees dark shadows and hears sounds of weeping. To his left, similar scenes. According to the narration in Sahih al-Bukhari, these are the souls of Adam's descendants, those who will enter paradise on his right, those destined otherwise on his left. When Adam looks right, he smiles. When he looks left, he weeps. The second heaven. Moving upward, in the second heaven, Muhammad encounters Yahya or John the Baptist and Isa or Jesus. They also greet him and acknowledge him. The third heaven. Here he meets Yusuf or Joseph, of the famous story of the coat of many colors. The narrations describe him as having been given half of all beauty. Muhammad greets him, and Yusuf responds in kind. The fourth heaven. He met Idris, identified in Islamic tradition with Enoch from the Hebrew tradition, is in the fourth heaven. The Quran mentions Idris briefly but significantly, saying God raised him to a high place. The fifth heaven. Here Muhammad meets Harun or Aaron, the brother of Moses. White-bearded, described as beloved by his people. The sixth heaven, Musa or Moses himself, is here, and this meeting becomes important later in the story, as we'll see. According to the narrations, Moses weeps after Muhammad passes, and when asked why, he says that a young man has been sent after him whose followers will enter paradise in greater numbers than his own. The seventh heaven. At the top, in the seventh heaven, Muhammad meets Ibrahim or Abraham, described as leaning against the Bayt al-Maqmur, the heavenly house. According to Sahih al-Bukhari, this heavenly house is directly above the Kaaba in Mecca, and 70,000 angels enter and worship there every single day, never the same angels twice. And then, beyond even this, the narrations describe the Prophet's journey toward the Sidrat al-Muntaha, the lote tree of the furthest boundary. This is, in Islamic cosmology, the edge of what any created being can know or reach. Beyond it is the domain of God alone. The Quran references this in Surah and Najm. When he reached the lote tree of the furthest boundary, near it was the garden of refuge. When the lote tree was shrouded in what shrouded it, the sight did not wander, nor exceed its limit. What exactly Muhammad experienced at this point is described differently across narrations. Some accounts speak of him receiving direct divine communication, not through Jibreel as intermediary, but directly. This is theologically significant and also contested, as scholars differ on exactly how to understand it. Okay, now here's the part of the story that I think is the most underappreciated, because it has a direct practical impact on the daily life of every Muslim on earth right now. During this ascent, at the point of closest approach to the divine, Muhammad is given a command. Muslims are to pray 50 times a day. 50 times. On the way back down, he passes Moses again in the sixth heaven. And Moses asks, "What were you commanded?" Muhammad says, 50 prayers a day. And Moses says, essentially, "Look, I know people. I dealt with the Israelites for decades. 50 prayers is too much. Go back and ask for a reduction." So Muhammad goes back. The command is reduced to 40. He comes back down. Moses says, "Still too much. Go back again." This back and forth continues, going up, asking for reduction, coming back down, Moses saying it's still too many, until the number is brought down to 5. 5 daily prayers. At this point, Muhammad says he's too shy to keep asking for more reductions, and a voice declares that the command is 5 prayers, but the reward will be counted as 50. Now I want to pause on this story for a second, because it's fascinating on multiple levels. First, from a theological perspective, it connects the 5 daily prayers, Salah, which is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, directly to this miraculous event. Every Muslim who prays 5 times a day is, in a sense, performing an act that was literally negotiated in heaven. Second, from a narrative perspective, the role of Moses here is really interesting. Here's a prophet who predates Muhammad by over 1,000 years, and he's giving him practical advice. It humanizes the interaction in a way that's quite striking. According to academic scholars studying the Hadith literature, including Jonathan Brown in his book, Muhammad's Legacy in the Medieval and Modern World, this narrative is also significant because it presents Moses as not just a historical figure, but an active participant in the prophetic mission, concerned with the welfare of the Muslim community even before it fully existed. Alright, here's where things get really interesting, because this is the part that most YouTube videos either skip over completely or handle in about 30 seconds. We're going to give it the time it deserves. The central controversy is this: was the Isra Mi'raj a physical journey, meaning Muhammad's actual body traveled to Jerusalem and through the heavens, or was it a spiritual experience? A dream? A vision? And this is not a modern debate invented by skeptics. This has been argued by Muslim scholars since the very early days of Islam. The Quran's wording. Let's start with the text itself. The Quran verse that describes the Isra uses the word abdu, meaning servant or slave, which many classical scholars argue refers to the whole person, body, and soul together. If it had been a purely spiritual experience, they argue, the text would have used a different word. Furthermore, Surah and Najm, which describes the Miraj, uses the language of sight. The heart did not lie about what it saw. and the sight did not wander. Some scholars read this as confirmation that it was a real, physical, visual experience. The Quraysh reaction. Here's another piece of evidence that the traditional scholars point to. When Muhammad came back from this experience and told people in Mecca what had happened, the reaction of the Quraysh, his opponents, was to mock him and call it impossible. And significantly, some of his own followers, people who already believed in him, found it so difficult to accept that they left the faith. According to Ibn Hisham's Sirah, when word spread through Mecca, a group of Muslims reportedly apostatized because they couldn't believe the journey was real. Now, the scholars ask, why would anyone have that extreme a reaction if Muhammad had only said, "I had a dream"? Dreams are normal. Nobody leaves their religion because a prophet had a vivid dream. The fact that people found it scandalous and unbelievable suggests that Muhammad was presenting this as a literal, physical event. This argument is made by Ibn Kathir and earlier by scholars like al-Nawawi and Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, giants of classical Islamic scholarship. The counter-argument, the role of the word vision. But here's where it gets complicated. In the Quran, there's a verse in Surah al-Isra, the same chapter as the Night Journey, that says, "And we made the ruqya or vision which we showed you only as a trial for people." The word ruqya can mean a waking vision or a sleeping dream, depending on context. Some early Muslim scholars, including, reportedly, Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan and one position attributed to Aisha, though this is disputed, took this verse to mean that the journey, or at least part of it, was a vision rather than a physical event. The famous scholar Ibn Abbas, cousin of the Prophet and one of the most revered early interpreters of the Quran, is reported to have said that the Isra was physical, but the Miraj might have been a vision. Though other scholars dispute this reading of his position, the mainstream classical position. Despite these nuances and debates, the mainstream position that emerged among Sunni scholars over time, and which is held by the vast majority of Muslim scholars today, is that both the Isra and Miraj were physical journeys undertaken while Muhammad was awake. Al-Nawawi, the 13th century scholar and commentator on Sahih Muslim, stated clearly that the correct position is that it was physical. Ibn al-Qayyim, the 14th century scholar, wrote extensively defending this position. Ibn Kathir, also 14th century, argued similarly in Al-Bidaya wal-Nihaya. Their argument, if it were merely a dream, there would be nothing miraculous about it. Dreams of journeys are ordinary. The Quran mentions it as a sign, which implies something extraordinary, something that challenged people's understanding of what was possible. The modernist and academic perspective. In more recent times, some Muslim intellectuals and academics have taken a more nuanced stance. Fazlur Rahman, the Pakistani-American Islamic scholar, argued in his academic writings that the categories of physical versus spiritual may be too binary, that prophetic experience operates in a different mode of consciousness that doesn't map neatly onto either category. Similarly, some Western academic scholars studying Islam, including those whose work appears in the Encyclopedia of the Quran, approach the event from a historical and literary perspective, noting parallels with other ascension narratives in ancient Near Eastern traditions and asking what these narratives communicate about theological meaning rather than trying to adjudicate their literal truth. Now, and this is important, these academic perspectives are not necessarily accepted within mainstream Islamic scholarship. I'm presenting them because understanding the full range of how this event has been interpreted gives you a richer picture of the story. The date controversy. One more layer of controversy. When exactly did Isra Mi'raj happen? There is no firm consensus on this, even among classical scholars. Various positions place it in the 10th, 11th, or 12th year of prophethood. Some scholars even disagree on which month. The 27th of Rajab, the 7th month in the Islamic lunar calendar, has become the most widely observed date for commemorating this event, and many Muslims celebrate it as a holiday. However, as Islamic scholar Ibn Kathir and others noted, the specific date of 27th Rajab is not established by strong hadith evidence. It's a traditional observance rather than a confirmed historical date. Some scholars, particularly those in the Salafi tradition, have actually discouraged making the 27th of Rajab a formal celebration for precisely this reason. They argue that commemorating an unverified date with religious ceremony risks introducing innovation into the faith. This itself has become a point of debate within Muslim communities. So you've got debate on the nature of the event, debate on the date, and even debate on whether to celebrate it. This is a story that keeps generating discussion 14 centuries after it happened. Let me bring this back to something concrete and accessible. Most Muslim scholars throughout history, the ones who shaped mainstream Islamic thought, treated the physical nature of Isra Mi'raj as a matter of faith. They did not view it as needing scientific validation. Their framework was, God created the physical universe and its laws, and God can also suspend or transcend those laws at will. The impossibility of traveling from Mecca to Jerusalem in seconds, by human standards, is exactly what makes it a miracle. According to Sayyid Hossein Nasr, one of the most prominent contemporary Islamic scholars and a professor at George Washington University, the story of Isra Mi'raj is not primarily about breaking physical laws. It's about the nature of prophetic consciousness and the relationship between the human and the divine. In his view, trying to analyze it purely through the lens of modern physics or neuroscience misses the point entirely. The story speaks a different language. It's not the language of physics. It's the language of spiritual meaning. And even among people who approach it more literally, who say, yes, his body traveled, this was real in every physical sense. The point is not just the travel. It's what was seen, what was communicated, and what was brought back. Because Muhammad came back with something. He came back with the 5 daily prayers. He came back with visions of paradise and hell, of the consequences of different deeds, of prophets and angels, and cosmic architecture. He came back with a deepened sense of mission and purpose. According to Martin Lings, the psychological and spiritual transformation that followed this night is evident in Muhammad's subsequent actions and teaching. After the year of grief, after all that loss and rejection, he did not crumble. He regrouped. Within 2 years, he would make the Hijrah, the migration to Medina, which would mark the beginning of the Islamic state and community. The worst night of his life gave way to the most transcendent night of his life. And then the rest of history followed from there. Let me bring this right down to the present moment. Every single day, about 1.8 billion Muslims around the world perform 5 daily prayers. They do it at dawn, at midday, in the afternoon, at sunset, at night, in office buildings and on factory floors, in schools and hospitals and fields, in every country on earth, in every language. And according to Islamic tradition, every one of those prayers traces back directly to a single night in the 7th century when a grieving prophet was taken to the edge of the divine and came back with a specific number. Not 50, not 10, 5. Because of a conversation between 2 prophets on the way down from heaven. That's an extraordinary claim. And it has an extraordinary consequence. One of the most widespread daily practices in human history. Beyond the prayers, Isra Mi'raj holds significance for a few other reasons that echo into the present. Jerusalem. The Isra places Jerusalem, and specifically the area now known as the Temple Mount or Al-Haram al-Sharif, at the very center of Islamic spiritual geography. Al-Aqsa Mosque is considered the 3rd holiest site in Islam precisely because the Prophet traveled there and prayed there on this night. This is not a secondary or peripheral belief. It is foundational, and it is one of the reasons why Muslim connection to Jerusalem is so deeply felt and so politically charged in the contemporary world. The spiritual significance and the geopolitical reality are inseparable for many Muslims. The nature of prophethood. The Miraj also functions, in Islamic theology, as the definitive validation of Muhammad's prophetic status, meeting all the previous prophets, leading them in prayer, being taken to the highest point of creation. These are not the experiences of someone who invented a religion for political purposes. This is, within the Islamic framework, the biography of someone chosen for a specific cosmic role, personal meaning. And then there's what this story means for ordinary people in their ordinary lives. The most common takeaway that preachers and scholars draw from this story is the one embedded in its timing. It happened in the year of grief. It happened after loss and rejection and exhaustion. And it says, your darkest moment may be right before your greatest one. The valley does not last forever. There is something deeply human about that message. And maybe that's why this story, complicated, debated, extraordinary, has been told and retold for 14 centuries. It speaks to something that people in every age recognize, the experience of suffering and the hope of transcendence. Alright, we covered a lot today. We went through the year of grief, the journey on the Al-Buraq, the farthest mosque in Jerusalem, 7 heavens, prophets old and new, the negotiation of the 5 daily prayers, and one of the longest-running theological debates in Islamic scholarship. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this video, it's this. The story of Isra Mi'raj is not a simple fairy tale, and it's not a problem to be solved by science. It's a layered, historically complex, spiritually rich narrative that has shaped the lives of a significant portion of humanity for well over a millennium. Whether you believe it literally, spiritually, metaphorically, or you're still figuring out what you believe, it deserves to be understood fully and thoughtfully. And now you have a much fuller picture than most people do. Now here's what I want from you. Drop a comment below. What part of this story surprised you the most? Was it the debate about body versus soul? The negotiation of the prayers? The timing in the year of grief? I genuinely want to know. If this video taught you something, smash that like button. It helps more people find this content. And honestly, stories like this deserve a bigger audience. Subscribe if you want more deep dives like this into history, religion, and the stories that shape the world we live in. We go deep. We don't skip the complicated parts. See you in the next one.